Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. We give ourselves a few minutes as we allow people to join the webinar. Thanks a lot. Stay with us. All right. A very good afternoon, morning, and good evening, based on where you are. My name is Cedric Ninahazwe. I work for the Global Network of People Living with HIV as the Global Advocacy Manager. And I'm the one of the co-moderator of this webinar today. And I'm with my colleagues from STOPAIDS, Olivia Compton, Communication Engagement at STOPAIDS. We have a good lineup of speakers, but we are also aiming to make this webinar as much as possible a conversation. So we are going to have more time to discuss, but we will first of all give time to speakers who has prepared this webinar for us, but also going to share with us more on our experience in engaging in the high-level meetings, but also some of the key opportunities and practical things that we may need to do for our engagement in the upcoming high-level meeting for UHC and pandemic preparedness and response. Today, we're going to hear from Olya Golichenko, who works at Frontlineaids. I think I will give you time to introduce yourself, Olya, when you're going to speak. I would ask everyone to do the same, but at the moment, say your name and the organizations that people can get an idea who is on the panel. We also hear from WACIHealth, who works as the coordinator of civil society engagement mechanism for UHC 2030, but I think you may need to add more on your position, WACIHealth, when you introduce yourself, so that I don't mess it up at any point. We also have Samantha Rick from AVAC, and we hear from my colleague friends, Anam from GNP+. Just also a reminder that as you can see on the screen, we do have translation in different languages: Spanish, Russian, Portuguese, and French. Please do select the language that is more that you like to use, and we would also like to give space for everyone who would like to ask questions or make comments on this particular subject. We are not experts. That's why we're aiming to have a conversation. Do raise your hand if you feel like you can speak, or if you don't want to speak but still have a question, you can put in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that the question is going to be addressed by one of or all of our speakers. So before we go into the discussions, I will hand over to my co-moderator, Olivia, who is going to introduce our first speaker. Olivia, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cedric. And it's wonderful to be here today and to have so many of you join. So our first speaker today is our first speaker that we have is Florence, co-executive director of GNP+. So warm welcome to Florence. And I'd love to start, Florence, by asking you a question, which is reflecting on the HIV high-level meeting. Where shall we invest our time and effort for effective engagement in the upcoming high-level meeting? Thank you.
Hi, Olivia and everyone else. I unfortunately am unable to have my video on. I don't know why. Might be a Zoom setup issue. So maybe someone could have that on for me. Thank you for your question, and apologies. I'm en route on travel, so apologies for my background noise. So to your question on what or where should we focus our attention, I think in learning from our work with the high-level meeting on HIV, and just being honest about the fact that this was a high-level meeting on HIV in 2021, and it's a system that we were aware of or had engaged in, not of course to the highest level possible, but to some degree, we knew the players, we knew the partners. It was easier for us to engage within the process. Now, in comparison to now, with the high-level meeting on UHC and the high-level meeting on pandemic preparedness, this is not necessarily the situation we find ourselves in. We are in uncharted waters, so trying to find our way around issues. We are trying to coordinate with the different players. So I think where we need to figure out how to start by prioritizing our attention as communities needs to be how we organize together. We are stronger when we are together and able to very much streamline our needs, our asks very clearly to the missions, and especially at this negotiation process as the political declarations are being made. So one of the lessons that I take from the UN high-level meeting on HIV was that for GNP+ and AIDS funds, through our Love Alliance work, we were able to create this platform where different levels of community and civil society action was taking place. So there was the part where we built capacity on the process, which is very much needed at this time. People need to know, what are these processes like? What do they mean? Because ultimately the decisions made at global level need to be interpreted by us and by our countries. And we need to get in action as civil society and communities to begin to hold our governments and decision makers at country level accountable to implementing the decisions that have been made. So people need to be aware of what this means for them and what these decisions, however they come out, will mean in reality. So there's the past aspect of capacity building, of the process, of the issues, of the language that is being negotiated to be secured within the political declaration. The second part is the different aspects of tactics and strategies for advocacy. It's different with different missions. as many people who've engaged with these processes know, it's different at different levels. What do we do with blocks, for example, countries that are negotiating as blocks vis-a-vis countries that are negotiating, unilaterally? How do we, what aspects of our community language do we give? How do we monitor to ensure that language and concepts like community leadership that have already been set as precedent in other political declarations are also used within this space? How do we secure our rights? Because ultimately questions around human rights that are linked to our access to to our enjoyment of our human rights get asked a lot in these processes. So the different tactics and strategies used at this time, a platform for coordinating around that is needed now as we get to the negotiations, but primarily also in New York, once we are there, which rooms to go to, who to chat to about different things. The other thing that we learned was that there are, I promise it's my third and final, the progressive countries want to support, but sometimes they don't have the materials or the information that they can use to counter the non-progressive arguments around things that matter to us. So we started off the work around developing the compendium on languages for HIV, UN languages on HIV that cut across SRHR, but I think some of the language there can be used for these processes as well, because ideally, sexual and reproductive health and rights would be a big component of UHC. Community leadership would be a big component of both UHC and PPR. So we are hoping to use that compendium now, update it and share it with everyone to be able to use that with their missions, because they show the different concepts and languages already secured within different processes, similar processes, and then governments can use those to argue for the things that matter to us. So those are the three I see as important at this point, because we have 0 drafts out now. We are looking at the drafts. We are trying to identify whether the language we wanted or things that matter to us are being captured in the way we want them captured. And then hopefully to keep doing that in the various other rounds until we get to the point where the political declarations are developed. I hope I sort of answered the question in a broad sense anyway.
Thank you, Florence. That was fantastic. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for Florence? Please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, in that case, let's move on to our next speaker, Sam. So huge welcome to Sam, who will be speaking. Sam will be speaking. So Sam is from AVAC, a multilateral and PPR advocacy specialist. So welcome to Sam. And my question for you to start with, Sam, is based on our experience of engagement in the multi-stakeholder hearings, the coalition sent a statement to member states, and as we know, they shared their reflections. So really interested to hear your thoughts on what could be civil society and community strategies before, after, and during the high-level meetings in September for an effective source of engagement. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies for the state of my video. I'm at a meeting in Geneva, and the hotel's internet is really, really poor, so I have to be on my phone with the data. Yeah, so I think I'll just summarize what happened at the multi-stakeholder hearing and why we sent that statement. At the multi-stakeholder hearing, I think civil society has come to enjoy a level of just sort of baseline acceptable engagement that we did not see at the multi-stakeholder hearing. Firstly, all 3 of the multi-stakeholder hearings were only half of a day. Usually a multi-stakeholder hearing for just one topic would be 2 or 3 days. So the time was cut significantly, which leaves very little room for interventions from the floor. The registrations for the multi-stakeholder hearing were open for up until less than a month after they were open before the multi-stakeholder hearing itself. So a lot of people that did get to register and did receive registrations didn't have enough time to get a visa if they needed a visa to the US or to organize travel. I mean, with 3 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks until the meeting, that's just simply not enough time for most civil society and communities across the world to organize that kind of travel. So it resulted in the room being comprised of mostly people who either had long-term visas already or didn't need visas to travel to the US, which is really disappointing. Because that not only restricts people from getting to intervene, but it decreases the diversity of opinions from civil society and communities that member states are able to hear. In addition to those barriers, there were just little logistics problems throughout the hearing. A lot of people had problems getting their badges, even though they had approved registrations. And then in the actual hearing itself, several member states contributed interventions. And while a few of their interventions were, welcome, they were strong, the fact that there was so little room for civil society and communities to speak in the first place is really disappointing to see member states take a lot of that space. So a group of us drafted a statement to send to the co-facilitators, to WHO and the UN President of the General Assembly's office. And it was signed on by more than 90 organizations. So we hope they hear that a lot of people are calling for these things. But the main requests were a virtual hearing for those that weren't able to attend the multi-stakeholder hearing in person, and subsequent briefs at each stage of the drafting process. Since there is no civil society engagement mechanism formally for the PPR HLM, there isn't that sort of like feedback between the formal engagement mechanism and member states that we've had in other HLMs, and that is present in the TP and UHC HLMs. So we're not privy to, any of the negotiations. The drafts aren't sent to us. We don't have any way to put textual input as a group of civil society. And so those are things we were trying to ask for. So far, we have not received any support from the organizers on those fronts, but still pushing for more inclusion and engagement. But knowing that there has been no formal engagement mechanism, there are groups of civil society and community organizations that are sort of self-organizing. One of them is a group of mostly organizations that work on HIV, but other ones as well, that have been working on pandemic preparedness issues for a few months now, sort of making ourselves a group and submitting textual edits and suggestions to member states on our own. So just getting, every email of a mission in New York that we can get and sending it along. That seems to be the best way to get things in. That has been shown to be a little bit successful, at least. For one example, we've seen the compilation text of edits that member states have made to the draft. And one of our suggestions was to include good participatory practice principles, or GPP principles, in clinical trials. And that made it in one of the member state suggestions. So clearly they're at least reading the documents that we send them. And trying to schedule, some more meetings alongside those missions to elaborate on what our reasoning for different edits, and also to show support where member states are supporting our priorities, where we can see that they're adding more clauses or retaining clauses that we support, and deleting anything that's harmful. Just making sure that we show them that there's a lot of organizations on their side, and that even if there's big countries going against them, that they should hold fall on that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Samantha. And we have a question in the chat, or I think someone raised their hand. Got 2 participants raise their hands, but we've also got a question in the chat, which I'll just read out. So This question is from Nazareth. Why can't we promote more awareness on sexual behaviors instead of limiting to SOGI for sexual transmission? Most people are blaming LGBTQIs in certain countries, but the fact is they're just keeping population, they are just key populations, but risk of sexual transmission through sexual acts regardless of SOGI sex. So does anyone want to comment on this comment that's put in the chat? If not, no, okay. If not, we can move on to Florence, please jump in.
Again, apologies for my background noise, but I hope you can hear me clearly. I think what we need to understand is that there is, I believe there is currently a very systemized and strong global trend that is typically anti-rights. It's not new to us. I think for many of us who have engaged in the 2021 UN high-level meeting, in the development of the global AIDS strategy, and last year, during the World Health Assembly resolution on the strategy on HIV, TB, and hepatitis and STIs, we saw this trend where certain conservatist countries try to put a lot of attention to fighting sexual orientation and gender identities. And so there's language around broadly anti-rights. It's just not on SOGI, but in our experience, we did see how this played out, where people are wondering what are women's rights, for example, what are sexual identities, for example. And so in wanting to look at something like the compendium has showed us cases and situations where countries have come together to come to compromises around language previously that can be used for language that go into documents like these ones. The idea here is not to lose completely. What you'll understand about this process is it's negotiations, and sometimes there's give and take. And I did notice from our HIV experience, their colleagues here, I saw there that we lost a number of things, gave a number of things. And sometimes it's just, what are we willing to live by? But one of the things that it's painful for us to have lost, even in that process, was the actual respect and acknowledgement of sexual orientation and gender identities. Now, to the point where you raised Nasarias, I think that's the person who wrote the question. A lot of work is needed, not just for this process, but to address what I see now as a global problem that is going to be facing us in the coming years. So we need to organize around educating the masses, educating the public around not behaviors, not identities, but the actual items that are of importance, and to try to make issues about issues. And looking forward to doing a lot of work together around this trend, anti-rights trends and experiences we are having now. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks, Florence. Olya, would you like to respond directly to that question, or shall I go to the hands raised from the audience?
If I can very quickly come in on this question, just to add to what Florence was saying, I think this anti-rights movement is an example of issues that are being picked up as blocks of countries and mega blocks of countries are really demonstrating power against each other. Another of these issues is, for example, reference to sovereignty, state sovereignty. And I think, you know, on one hand, it's really important to address these issues face on and really through compendium of evidence, etc., propose alternative evidence. At the same time, I think it's also good to kind of zoom out and also see this is just, you know, the trade-offs and demonstration of power in the world where the trust is completely broken. And I think what's really important for us is come up with new strategy where we work with brokers which you know, can stand between the 2 or 3 mega blocks. I think particularly LAC countries, Brazil as the incoming G20 chair, could really play that, you know, brokering role of reshaping things and maybe finding new trade-offs where maybe there is a bit of improvement on the anti-rights language, you know, and the trade-off comes up from somewhere else. But I guess what's key for us is that the trade-off doesn't come at the expense of our issues. So yeah, let's zoom out and maybe see how we can work not with the usual missions, but, you know, with governments with whom we have not worked before. And yeah, if there are colleagues from Brazil. I think Thailand seems to propose really interesting language in the draft of the HLM declaration. Please engage further. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. We'll move to the hands raised in the chat. So Samuel, if you're there, please feel free to unmute and turn on your camera if you'd like to. And it would be great if you could direct your question to one of the panelists. Thank you. If you're unable to unmute, would you like to put your question in the chat?
I think maybe while we wait for someone to be able to speak, I don't know if Samantha, you're still there. We can also address the question that was asked in the chat in terms of how we can. I don't know if it's already responded, but Samantha, if you'd like to quickly respond on that, so that everyone else who's not able to follow the chat can get the answer. I got the question if is about how to join the high-level meetings, or if it's about how to join the coalition. Maybe you can respond on both.
Sure, yes. To join the high-level meeting, if your organization has ECOSOC status with the UN, those registrations, I've been told, will open in July. If your organization does not have ECOSOC status with the UN, then registrations were open and they did close June 19th. And if you want to try, you can email the UN Nonprofit Bureau to see if you can maybe get in late. But otherwise, the non-ECOSOC registration has closed.
Thanks a lot, Sam. I see that we have two other questions, but before we got the questions, I would like to invite the second speaker from the panel, and then we got directed those questions. But if there are other questions that are coming through, please raise your hand or also try to put in the chat, and we will ask colleagues that are working on the technicality side of things that check if the other people can speak apart from the panelists. So Olia, I think we've heard about the experience of HIV high-level meeting. We also heard from Samantha the recent experience during the stakeholders hearing in terms of civil society and community engagement. And my question here, and I think what everyone else is looking for this particular webinar is, if you look at those experiences and then also try to be more practical, what are the key things that we need? What are our strategies? What can we do? Especially think about country level, regional level. What is the practical things that we need to do to be able to be engaged into the high level meetings?
Great, thank you very much, Cedric, and thank you to everyone for this very interesting, important, and interactive webinar. I lead Frontlineaids Health and Community Systems Advocacy, and the reason why I'm mentioning it is because maybe some colleagues on this call, or maybe someone still feels a little bit hesitant about PPR agenda. I do want to say that we see PPR as the key ongoing agenda where things related to HIV, community and health responses and community-led services needs to be promoted. So yeah, if there are still any hesitation, please let's talk about it, because that's very important. So I'll try to look back a little bit and mostly look forward. But most of my reflections are built on the work that we have done together with a number of partners on this call over the past almost 6 months, really starting from January and earlier. Our objective has been to set up an advisory structure to which Florence referred earlier. So multi-stakeholder task force or civil society task force that would have an official advisory status within HLM to input in a more organized way. So unfortunately that advocacy has failed, and we have a lot of very useful learnings for the way forward. So firstly, I think it's important lesson learned that WHO, as a partner, as a stakeholder, is really different from UNAIDS. UNAIDS during the HIV HLM has really been supportive of setting up this structure. Unfortunately, WHO has not been, and I think that's important for other processes like the treaty, because what we have seen, and I think that, unfortunately, this might happen for other processes like the pandemic treaty, as the political process is developing, the space for civil society engagement might be shrinking further and further and further. So at the very beginning, we made this conscious choice that when so-called modalities declaration of the PPR HLM were drafted, we knew it's going to be very difficult to have language on civil society and multi-stakeholder task force. And so we kind of decided not to have that fight at that moment. Looking back now, I do think that, we should have maybe tried it. And for future processes, I think the key lesson learned is, if we need to have a fight and have a difficult campaign, let's have it now, because as the process move on, the space is really shrinking. And we see a lot of, bottlenecks, which Sam was describing, resulting in that, getting late invitations, not have, an open invitation to propose the speakers that we wanted, etc. So it's great to have this call. I think we really need to mobilize better, have even more sign-ons to the key milestones that are upcoming. So I have suggestions about a couple of key milestones where we really, can mobilize and work together. Firstly, I think we should put forward as soon as possible a proposal on the thematic panels of the upcoming HLM and civil society and community speakers. My fear is that this might have been already decided, but I think we should always try and put this one pager forward or 2 pages as soon as possible. Secondly, although it's very difficult, I think we should come up with the top 3 key language positions, meaning kind of the key language that we want to see in the PPR declaration, and what are some of the red lines. So as Florence said, we probably want to be really saying community-led services, not, for example, community-based services or health services. Like I would really encourage, for example, to have this as one of the red lines, but let's, find the process to come up to those positions. And as Florence said, it's really important to have a coordinated reach to country delegations, particularly, as I was saying, unusual partners. Thailand proposed a very interesting language around community groups. So for example, if community led services would be pushed out by the Holy See, as we see in the current draft, maybe Thailand could be supportive, and we can encourage them to take their formulation around community led groups forward to community led services. And I think really LAC countries are really important to reach out to. So yeah, if colleagues are from these countries, please write in the chat and let's engage. So the country partners work and work in countries is really important. Couple of tips from previous HLMs. So, I would encourage partners to map who are the key stakeholders in countries in so-called capitals, in your capital city, who would be joining potentially the New York missions. Very often it's, I think it might be the mixed group of Ministry of Foreign Affairs colleagues and Ministry of Health colleagues, as well, of course, the colleagues in the country missions in New York are really important. And, if you're sitting in one of the countries and you're thinking, or particularly if there are colleagues on community level, which is really welcome, and you sit, how would I connect to people to New York? People who are sitting in New York, I mean, they're very busy, but sometimes it's really important for them to hear from the ground and hear, okay, this language is important. So just do those kind of, do that sort of human connection and relationship building, because it can take the work really far. If there is anyone from countries who already knows who are the people going from their countries to New York HLM, please write from which ministries they are, so it can be useful for others. So really all of this, is important as the process, but really I see it as the opportunity to build relations with stakeholders involved in the PPR, risk management in countries. And it's an opportunity for all of us to learn better about PPR frameworks in countries and mechanisms which are in place, which are there, but there is almost zero accountability how they function on country level, because it's very kind of government-driven processes. Yes, it is time now, once you know who the right people are from your countries, to try to get on the government official delegations and do that sort of, strategizing together. How do we work with blocks of countries, as Florence was mentioning. On the country delegations, there is no algorithm as such. I think it's about human personal connections. So if anyone has, managed to get on the government delegations before for this sort of processes, please share your experiences in the chat or as you speak. And then the question is about coming to the HLM itself. And I think, there needs to be as many of us as possible. But my belief is that all the advocacy as much as possible needs to be done before, today and tomorrow. And if you're coming, I think it's important to be very clear that you should already be connected with partners, with key stakeholders, or it's a great, of course, opportunity for networking. But really the moment is now, like in 2 weeks' time, it's almost, a lot more too late compared to now. I know I'm probably out of time, just a couple of other key things based on the lessons learned. As I said, I do think that we need collaboration with more governments, because, we've worked kind of with a group of countries to get this multi-stakeholder group running. But, it proved that we need probably a lot more time and pull together a lot more governments. And also, WHO is a very, very bureaucratic organization. We should have probably worked on a lot more levels to be more successful. I think also kind of something for this group to reflect. I think we would want to find a better balance between external constructive criticism campaigning, as I call it, in addition to like an internal collaborative cooperation that we had with WHO, kind of very purposefully, because we wanted to build relations and, have very good relations with WHO. After we knew we're not successful, we didn't do a campaign kind of, showing this really outrageous outcome. But actually, we kind of maybe for the way forward, particularly maybe for longer processes like the treaty, we probably should have the campaigning arm as well as the policy influencing arm, as well as linking with the existing campaign. Like, for example, People Vaccine Alliance and many others that maybe some of you represent. And lastly, I think we need to be more conscious of our strengths and weaknesses as the global health and HIV community within the PPR space, and be very ready to address those weaknesses. So I think, key strengths is really our experience of effective engagement of communities and civil society. I think the key weakness, and I think just as an experiment, I think it would be interesting if you represent non-global health and non-HIV field like climate change or animal health, please put a plus in the chat. I think it would be interesting to know if on this call, for example, there are people from other sectors, because I think one of the key weaknesses that we have, there is definitely a perceived by stakeholders perception that we focus too narrowly on HIV and health. And again, this is kind of an experiment during this call to see if there are people from other sectors. So this is definitely a perceived weakness, because I do feel we are able to mobilize and bring a lot of sign-ons from different sectors, as we have done around our work and what Sam was describing. But at the same time, I think we do need to be reflective and bring together a broader group of stakeholders and be ready to kind of address the weaknesses. So, for example, the compendium that Florence was mentioning, I think it's really important and great to have it. But despite maybe the short time, I really feel we need to reframe it within PPR, prevention, response, and preparedness, and the heavy, maybe scientific language related to surveillance, etc., so that it's perceived better by the stakeholders. Thank you very much. Over.
Thanks. Oli. I think we have a question, two questions that probably the first one you've already addressed it, but the second one is coming from Aline, who's saying, what are the arguments that can community use to force government to engage with us at country level? Is there anything that you would like to add on that beyond what you just shared with us?
I think, this is a very good point. I think maybe to say, kind of take today or tomorrow as your starting point of a kind of long journey of developing relations with these new stakeholders. And we know that sometimes there is official way of influencing, but it is about building relations, understanding probably a new bunch of people with whom we have not worked before. I mean, really kind of when I speak to governments about PPR, it's the people that are doing like risk management. So it involves like, the risk management, finances, and also very specific country frameworks that some of our colleagues know better than others, and maybe we actually need to do like another webinar to invite I don't know if Marco from SAVE is on this call, but I always refer Marco to you, like, as you know those frameworks. None of us does, or at least I don't, despite having worked in PPR for a long time. So I think let's familiarize ourselves with this new area of work, and just use HLM as the opportunity to start building relations. Even if you don't manage to get on the delegation, like if you constructively start building and do the mapping who the people are and understand that setting, I think that would be already a more important outcome than pushing really hard without really understanding PPR. That would be my answer. Over.
Thanks a lot, Oya. And I think we did it by purpose to also have colleagues that are working on universal health coverage. And we had a very particular experience for the stakeholders hearing on PPR. It makes sense because it's new, and we are trying to explore the member states ways of engagement, but also we don't have the full picture. But it's different for UHC. This is not the first high-level meeting, and I guess there's a lot we're probably going to learn, but also there's other things that we may need to take into consideration as we prepare for the high-level meeting. So I would like you to take us through the preparation of high-level meeting on UHC. What do you think civil society and community need to take into consideration? What are the opportunities? What are the practical things that you can name 1, 2, 3 that people can list and then try to achieve before and beyond the high-level meeting on UHC? I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Cedric. So I think listening to the previous speakers, we're not just starting this from right now. We have processes we've been through so far. The most stakeholder hearing, the most important event that we've participated in, and the things and lessons we've learned from that, including the fact that the UN system has not necessarily prioritized civil society very well, and so how we move forward, we need to take those lessons and continue to push them, like EVAC is doing and others, but also making sure that we keep our eyes on the ball and not lose sight of what we need to do, because the UN system is not going to change today. They're going to continue to function the way they do. And so in terms of how we move forward, let me just show you a quick screen here of where we've been in the UHC space, if I can figure out how to share my screen. So this is these are the various stages we've gone through are in preparation for the high-level meeting on UHC. We started off earlier in the year with the consultations, the most stakeholder consultations, on the action agenda. The action agenda is a document with what you would call the key asks for the UHC movement. Civil society fed into that, member states fed into it, private sector and other stakeholders. And then we moved to March. We finalized. We went back and forth in terms of incorporating the feedback we received. Over 800 responses that we received, and we developed the action agenda. In March, we launched on the 27th of March, and then we took that document with us to the multi-stakeholder hearing in May. And we shared it with the President of the General Assembly and also with member states. We had conversations over a high-level lunch on the 8th of May with member states and other stakeholders there about what needs to happen going forward in terms of incorporating these key asks or the action agenda into the zero draft and then on to the political declaration. At the multi-stakeholder hearing, it was announced that we will have the zero draft for the political declaration out by May 24th, and this was during WHA, and it did come out on the right dates, and we started the mobilization to get feedback into from civil society and others into the on the zero draft, and since then there have been actually now two because there's been the compilation that was produced on June 8th of the zero draft that shows all the feedback, that includes all the feedback that the PGA received from the co-facilitators received from member states and also civil society and others. And that has been over the last week been negotiated and all of that. And today we're expecting a new version of the political declaration on UHC. And so what have we seen so far that can inform our engagement for the UHC political declaration? One of the things that we tried to do was to look at what was in the political declaration and what wasn't. And when the zero draft came out, we analyzed that, and one of the things we noticed was that it was quite mapped according or organized, structured according to the action agenda, which really meant a lot, because it meant that we didn't have to go back to scratch to start pushing everything that we had laid out in the action agenda, but rather that we needed to look at specific things within that structure that were still missing. And so it included, the 8 kind of like areas of actions that we laid out in the action agenda: the political leadership, sustaining financing, healthcare workforce, gender equality, accountability, laws and regulations, and pandemic preparedness and UHC. And so, so then we were like, okay, let's look at the specific things that we need to push as civil society. And so we launched immediately a survey to identify those kind of gaps or priorities that were missing. Over 2 or 3 days, we received quite good feedback from civil society, and really most of the civil society and community members agreed with what was in the zero draft, but then had a little bit of a few more suggestions on how to further strengthen some of the areas. And then we UHC and 30, CSM and others went on to share that feedback with the country missions in New York. And then when the compilation came out on June 8th, we again analyzed it, and we saw that the draft was actually strengthened even further, but there were still things missing. For example, we're still missing targets on health funding broadly. We had asked for 5%, it wasn't there. There were some percentage numbers there for PHC, like 1%, but some of there were still some gaps. And so we again shared our feedback with missions in New York, and also asked advocates to push this at the country level. There was also some new language on, different things, but I think here I'll talk about the language on Ukraine, where they were pushing for emphasis on these wars of aggression and undermining territorial integrity of other countries. And that, obviously, as you've seen, the TB space has created a lot of pushback on the negotiation. So far, we've been moving according to the schedule that we had, but because of some of these challenges, you never know what will happen in the next few weeks. So what can you do to engage? What, as WACIHealth, can we do now? If you're not already engaged, or if you're engaged, or not, you should continue to follow the negotiations. It is, I agree with the previous speakers that we continue to develop resources and all of that, but it's like the ship, at least for the UHC negotiations, has shipped. And so the ship has left. And so at this point, we need to be very, very strategic, very targeted in our outreach. There's some countries, if you follow the negotiations, you will see some countries pushing on certain language or pushing on certain issues, and you want to target other countries, or always those same countries, to make sure that you push them to get to that, as we're talking about compromise on language that we want to see. We also want to make sure we see these groups, some in the African group, the negotiating as groups, you have the G77 and others, and really targeting those groups to make sure that you share the language that we want to see reflected and that they're contesting. Make sure that you reach out to them as well. And then we want, as I mentioned before, we are continuing to push in New York, engaging the missions. Now, this engagement with permanent missions in New York is a little bit tricky, because the missions in New York actually don't, especially when they're controversial issues, they don't make the final decision on what to agree on or not. It is coming from the Ministry of Health or Foreign Affairs at the country level. And so we'll get to how we can engage at the national level, but you want to make sure that that you're also engaged beyond the missions, and that's where we need advocates to do most of the work. And then make sure that there are these opportunities to engage in other spaces. The G7 just ended, as you saw, really strong language on the high-level meetings on UHC and all of that. So you want to continue to engage in the spaces, because that's where you are interfacing with heads of states, with some of the people who are negotiating or have connection to the negotiations in New York, in the INB, in the SDG Summit. But SDG Summit is a little bit close to the actual HLMs, might not be. You want to engage now, not wait until the summit itself. And then we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have been calling for civil society feedback when we have the time to put it together. And so when we do that, please, stay tuned and make sure that you provide your feedback so that we can then take whatever you have. And if you don't have connections in New York or at the global level, we have some of that, and we'll take what you have suggested, assemble it, and share it with the missions in New York. And then, really important that we participate in the HLM itself. I think presence matters, representation matters. So making sure that we are there is very important. But the negotiations are happening before then. So making sure that we continue to negotiate until, to engage until September. Now, at the country level, it's a little bit different, because you have to know the different offices that are involved in this, and then the targeted kind of like audiences we are looking at. So really engaging directly with the Ministry of Health, also Foreign Affairs, because the political draft is negotiated through the Foreign Affairs, the missions. And so you want to make sure that you are connecting with them as well. And then, if you're able to communicate directly with your heads of state office, please do that, because we want not to see just ministers. Ministers are important, but we want these commitments to be made by the presidents, prime ministers themselves, because it really carries a different tone or priority or urgency when the president says, this is my agenda, versus a minister. And so we want everybody to be there, but especially heads of states to participate in the HLM, and then making sure that they include civil society and community members in their delegations, as previous speakers have said, and then continuing to push the different people that have power in government, members of parliament, making sure that you engage them, the ones that you think are involved in or pushing the health agenda, making sure that you engaged with them to push the Minister of Health or to push the head of state to participate. And some of the MPs will actually be in New York themselves, and then continuing to use the resources that we've put together. Yes, we might need additional resources, but let's use the resources we have as effectively as possible in our outreach. And these are some of the resources we have developed: the civil society feedback, the advocacy letter we've created for people to just plug in, address names, and just send that to your contacts, social media toolkit that we've developed. And then, one of the questions I've been receiving from advocates is, so then what, after the HLM? And so I wanted to just say a few things about that this is not, the HLM is not the end, in a way, the beginning of this long mobilization to make UHC and health for all a reality. And so there are opportunities after the HLM. There are some events that will be happening, but the big one for us will be the UHC Day on December 12th, and making sure that you push decision makers to deliver on the HLM commitments. You don't want to give them, you don't want to let a lot of time to lapse and then be like, 2 years later, you go to the head of state or Minister of Health and ask them what they're doing. You want to sustain that momentum and remind them 3 months later that they said this and they have to, and committed this, and they have to deliver now. And then we also have these State of the UHC commitment reviews that we do every year that are led by UHC 2030. And so you want to use, as to the extent possible, we want to use those consultations or meetings or surveys, whatever, to continue to feed and or even inform policymakers about what is actually not happening at the country level. The civil society engagement mechanism we have every year, we do country consultations with civil society, where we talk to them about what they're seeing in terms of UHC implementation or implementation of the commitments, and the assumption, or at least the goal, is to use that information to hold leaders accountable. So we want to make sure that we continue doing that, and we'll do that in 2024. And then, continuing to engage at the country level. Do not give decision makers time to divert the attention away to other things. And this applies across all the HLMs, not just the UHC one. So those are some of the things that I can propose in terms of how we can better engage going forward and beyond the HLM, but happy to answer any questions that people might have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Waiswa. Indeed, we do have 2 questions, and so the first question, I think I can see UHC, TB, and PPR, but I will ask our interpreter if they can help us translate the question. I did use Google Translation, but I'm not sure if I'll be doing fairness. So let me ask those that are helping us to translate if they could help us translate the question from Christian. I think it's Spanish. maybe while we wait, there's another question.
Cedric, you have to go to the English channel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess thanks a lot. I guess this is a more like a comment. The second question that we have is the response to any pandemic will only be effective if we achieve UHC. Don't you think civil society organization working on PPR and those working on UHC should unify forces? And if yes, do you see any opportunity? So I will ask WACIHealth and Olia to take 1 minute so that we can then move to colleagues who have raised their hands to speak. I will start with WACIHealth and then Olga. 1 minute and a half maximum.
Yeah, so it was intentional in the action agenda for us to have a specific action on health security or PPPR and UHC and then the connection between the two, because UHC is not just a goal for PPR, it is actually an enabler of pandemic preparedness and response. And so it is important that we continue to work together. When we started this process, actually, we were in very close communication with the PPR communication. We have stayed actually in close contact with them. The challenge has been that really there hasn't been a civil society engagement mechanism or Stop TB partnership then. So it's been a little bit of challenging, but I think that in spaces like this, we are continuing to build that and making that case that we need to work together toward the HLMs, both of them, and seeing this as one agenda, not two agendas. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Olia?
So just to kind of look back a little bit, when we were strategizing the advocacy around setting up and advocacy for setting up the multi-stakeholder task force for PPR HLM, kind of one additional thought that we have is that, we should probably have a strong coordination mechanism across all HLMs. At that point, we were kind of realistic. Okay, let's try to sort out PPR. We knew that for UHC and TB folks, are very organized. But I think, as you said, WACIHealth, the good thing is that I think a lot of partners that are part of UHC platform work both on UHC and PPR. So I think there is that natural feeding. However, maybe a very concrete outcome of this meeting could be that kind of we work in a more organized way. As Sam mentioned, we have set up this platform where a number of organizations come up and work in a kind of quite structured way to coordinate around PPR. Maybe we can, work with you and have a check-in meetings. I think at this stage, really to cross-check on the red lines, not to kind of preempt any conversations, but maybe to use this opportunity for, some of the preliminary pitching. I really agree with what you're saying, WACIHealth, about UHC strong health systems, community-led health systems being the base for strong PPR. So, what's emerging for me kind of from this conversation is that maybe making sure that community-led responses, community-led services, community-led groups is one of those red lines that we really push forward both across UHC and PPR. So the good thing is that we see quite good positions now within PPPR declaration draft on this, but it's literally like Canada, Australia, New Zealand has put this language forward. Holy See wants to delete it. And, you know, it comes across in several places. So it's going to be, you know, back-to-back negotiations. You know, maybe, again, if we try to say and have this strategizing between us, okay, if we don't get that, which hopefully we would, you know, what's the next level of compromise, like community-led groups, for example. And I think if we do this across to HLMs, we're in a better position because maybe we have, you know, more references to evidence. Maybe we can secure it at least in one HLM, if not in two. So yeah, I guess just to say, you know, let's definitely work more together and come up with those red lines. And I don't know if Moga wants to say, but I think IP is another, you know, important thing that maybe we can work in a similar way over.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you both. Moga, if you'd like to comment, I know that your hand's been up, so please feel free to come off mute and comment.
Yeah, thank you. So, God, this is really bizarre. I don't know, because I can't see people. I can only see the speaker, and now I don't see anybody. So basically, what I want to say is a couple of things. One thing is that we need it's really building on what you just said, that we need a coordination mechanism for the 3 high-level meetings. We never had the 3 high-level meetings at the same time as this year. So we need coordination to make sure not just a language on community-led or community-based, but also the main messages that we want. They're very similar. When I was looking at them and trying to make messages earlier on, very earlier on, to send messages to delegation, I actually put the same messages to the 3 high-level meetings. Then I can't remember now how I put it, but something like, you know, point 1, 2, 3, common for all. Point 4 is specific for UHC. Point 5 is specific for pandemic. So it's agreeing on the common messages across. I think it's important. What was the other point? Got off the board. I wanted to ask a question though. So anyway, if you want on access to medicine, I can share common messages, because I was really, really frustrated in New York when UHC, when civil society spoke on the UHC thing. There was hardly any mention of medicines. It was really strange. So so I think we need to do that. On One Health, and Olia, I think, mentioned other sectors apart from health and all that. So it does worry me that, again, civil society is pushing the One Health. Of course, One Health, I mean, I'm not, you know, don't expect me to say One Health is bad, but you can't just say One Health and go with the UK and others who are pushing for, and it is clear in the pandemic treaty, in the current draft, that, you know, you have to do surveillance and you have to do water and sanitation and this and that and the other. All is fine, you know, great that there is this obligation, but there is nothing in return. Basically, you do surveillance not just for human, but for animal and plants. And then when you find the pathogen, you share it with WHO or with, eventually it goes to pharmaceutical companies. And then, or you share it in God knows where, and then it goes to pharmaceutical company. They make products either for animals or for humans or for anybody, and you don't get anything from that. You know, you have to wait until, I don't know, they vaccinate all the animals in the US before they vaccinate the animals in Indonesia, who you know, Indonesia gave the virus already, or the pathogen already. So I think when we talk about One Health, we have to talk about benefit sharing, not just the vaccine or the product that results from the pathogen, vaccine, diagnostics, medicine, anything else, but also the profit that they make. And there is a precedent for that. We're not inventing anything new. There's a precedent on the flu vaccine, flu virus. So that is really, really important. My question is, at the consultation in New York, we asked, a number of civil society asked for an observer status during their negotiation, but I don't know if that was, if there's any progress on that. And I don't know, maybe you said it, Sam, at the beginning. I'm very sorry that I had to take a call with my doctor, so I didn't hear all what you said. But so apologies. Okay, so now they are negotiating, or they're about to negotiate the draft. Where are we? Apart from talking to delegation, which of course we'll do. But are we in the process at all as observers, or they will give us reports, or how do we know? And anybody, and does, my second question, does anybody has, like, is there a document with all the countries edits, the government, the member states edits, like the one we have with the INB, with the treaty, or am I dreaming this document? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Moga. Just appreciating that we've got a couple of minutes left and Sam's had to leave, but would one of the other panelists like to take Moga's questions?
I'll go. So in terms of the drafts that you can have access to, we did have the initial zero draft. It was made public. The next draft and the one that is coming out today have not been made public. If they do, we will definitely be sure to share them. But flagging for everybody that when you're suggesting language as I think I'm forgetting her name, said, you want to make sure you use previously agreed language. Even the action agenda is not previously UN agreed a language, but it's a multi-stakeholder document. So you can still draw on it and cite it, but just make sure that at this stage, the negotiations are so rough that you don't want to just give them 100 pages of us, but really specific things that already are supported by previously agreed language. And then on the question of common messages, yes, we should have some things, and I don't know to what extent it will be effective in the negotiations, but even after the negotiations, we want to make sure that we come back together to talk about what didn't happen, what happened, how do we continue to push those things, because they're not only going to be relevant for the political declaration. If they're relevant now, they will be relevant even after or with or without the political declaration. So we need to identify those things. There have been attempts to do that. We've had in the Asia Pacific region, we had some consultations with civil society. We developed some common asks and all of that. We've had conversations with East and Southern Africa. So there have been some spaces where some of the things have been flashed out, but not necessarily at the global level. So that would be great if we can do that. And then lastly, on the medicines, in the UHC hearing, just to point out, if you look at the action agenda, action number, I believe, number 6, is about access to enabling laws and regulations, and it really focuses on innovations in the medical field, and so take a look at that. But it's kind of like addressed somewhere in there. A little bit more specific language might be needed, and you can pass that along to member states directly, but just to say that it's in there.
Thanks very much. Sergey, if you're still there, I'm going to take you off mute, so please take the floor if you can hear us.
Hello, I will speak Russian. Ok. Добрый день, меня зовут Дмитриев Сергей, я исполнительный директор Health Advocacy Coalition, коалиция за право на здоровье, это организация из региона Восточной Европы и Центральной Азии. У меня не вопрос, у меня, наверное, призыв и предложение, то, что я слышал от предыдущих спикеров, я хотел бы это просто подчеркнуть и усилить. Я считаю, что надо призывать страны и, в принципе, ООНовские структуры все-таки давать больше возможностей сообществу отслеживать влияние, внедрение принципов ВОЗ в страновых программах и делать это через инструменты СЛМ, потому что на самом деле мы сейчас в регионе это делаем и имеем хорошие результаты. У нас есть платформа из 52 организаций региона Восточной Европы и Центральной Азии, которые как раз мониторят в стране доступность всеобщего охвата услугами здравоохранения и насколько сообщества вовлечены в это. Хочется отметить, что на международной арене все-таки наш регион сейчас нашему региону мало уделяется внимания. Как сказал предыдущий выступающий, мы имеем сейчас в регионе большую проблему в виде войны и агрессии Российской Федерации в сторону Украины. Вместе с тем мы имеем большое количество беженцев как с инфекционными, так и с неинфекционными заболеваниями, как в сторону Евросоюза с территории Украины, так и в сторону Восточной Европы и Азии с территории Российской Федерации. Если одни спасаются от войны и разрушения домов, то другие пытаются уйти от тоталитарного правительства. Эпидемиологическая ситуация в регионе в контексте ВИЧ и туберкулеза резко растет, в основном в восточно-азиатской части. И как раз системы медицинские сейчас трекаются данной ситуацией, к сожалению, этими беженцами, которые и ВИЧ-инфицированы, и с туберкулезом, и которые представляют ключевые группы. И вот сейчас как раз, по нашему мнению, регион должен быть приоритизирован и на встречу высокого уровня. Естественно, мы подали, зарегистрировались до 19 июня на встречу высокого уровня. На данный момент мы на нашей платформе, о которой я говорил ранее, обсуждаем вот эту драфтовый макет декларации, которая будет принята в сентябре. И, собственно, повторюсь, призываем приоритизировать регион Восточной Европы и Центральной Азии, потому что мы будем иметь проблемы в будущем с несколькими эпидемиями, и использовать community-led мониторинг как трекер, как мониторинг использования принципа ВОЗ в странах как Восточной Европы и Центральной Азии, так и, в принципе, в мире. Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much to Sergi, and I'm hoping that people were able to tune in and hear the translation there. For those who don't speak Russian, would anyone on the panel like to comment or respond to this?
Can I please come in?
Please do it. Oh, yeah.
Thank you to everyone for very valuable contributions. A couple of points. Firstly, just really to appreciate how UHC colleagues have framed the agenda as action agenda, using this, very well established, respected, almost like UN language in the best meaning of it, something one can't argue against, having a long process of multi-stakeholder engagement. I think it's something to kind of take a note for PPR colleagues, maybe for next processes, because it's probably too late now for that comprehensive process for HLM, but maybe something definitely for the treaty or other ongoing processes like international health regulations review. I think we just need to have things that can't be argued against, because we have seen that we kind of have been questioned, like, what's your legitimacy, etc., without having that UN-like document. And also, secondly, to appreciate, the importance of having a comprehensive platform like UHC 2030 to come up with those documents. And maybe that's also a question for us here. How do we organize in the long term? Is one of the platforms that Sam mentioned could be expanded to that level of platform? Do we want to kind of seek funding for it, etc.? Second point on Moga's question about observer status, I think it's, maybe write in the chat, have you requested that orally or via email? 2 points on this. One is that our experience is that, unfortunately, over the past months, WHO has not sent official replies on our very official letters to request the the structures that I described. It's very disappointing. We didn't have a kind of a chance to digest it. But I think, if we ever do want to kind of, digest this and put this in the campaign, I think it's very, let's put it like unprofessional, right? Not to respond. And secondly, like if anyone knows if there are official timelines, like similarly to the governments where the UN structures need to respond to, again, I think it's just something that we want to, maybe come back to at some point, because again, maybe like the big requests, meaning the partner requests need to be answered, but also individual requests like Moga, yours, if you have emailed about it. And just one more thought, others might have more experience, but maybe the best option now, in addition to what you have requested, is to try to join your country delegation, because I know that members of the official delegations, I think one of the key advantages of joining is that you get access to more negotiating or observer spaces compared to everyone else. So you probably can't sit at the negotiation table, but you can have kind of more input. So that's another kind of push why we should join our official country delegations. And then to pick up on Sergei's point, which I think is really important, really want to appreciate your analysis of the regional situation. I think it's very precise and accurate. I think what I want to say is that 2 points. On CLM mechanism, apologies, I didn't pick up the abbreviation first. I think it's really important that, if we do update to the compendium, that we adjust the formulation in a way that also speaks not only to like kind of human rights and maybe HIV and global health usual context, but also like CLM within surveillance context, a little bit more biomedical mechanisms. And I think, this is a piece that I think we need to do together, kind of break down the PPR biomedical language into more kind of community role, civil society role language, where the CLM terms would be understood and would be more mainstream, because in a way, WHO speaks the same language, but they're using different terms. And I think we need to come together so that, for example, CLM in our meaning gets funding from PPR streams of funding. And lastly, maybe in terms of kind of regional block and agenda, I think maybe the best way, if there is a way for you guys to kind of broker more of a regional position of governments, maybe, apologies if the term is not correct, but like the Baltic states, which are sort of neutral, maybe they can say not only like Russia, Ukraine, but for example, in a dream to say in this situation in Ukraine, for example, it's community-led services that has really delivered on the healthcare in this situation in Ukraine, but also in other countries. That's why we need to put this language in the declaration. So versus like, prioritizing just the region, I would say, draw out those lessons, because the topic is hot now, but I don't think it's gaining any, how to put it? Like basically we need to, we can get more from it on the top of just, acknowledging the outrageous aggression by Russia. Thank you.
Okay, but in any case, that's
Thank you so much, Olia and White Swan. I think only 4 minutes before we conclude the call, and I can proudly say that this has been really informative and very interactive as well. I don't know if there's any other question in the chat, but also in regards, looking at the time we have, I think maybe we may need to see how we address this later on. I would like to thank everyone. This has really been a very good conversation with a lot of input from our colleagues who joined, but also from the speakers. And personally, I thank you, Olia and Waiswa, Sam, who has already left, and friends. but also Morga, Sergey, and everyone else that really contributed to this conversation. I think we got something. We got some key practical things that we may need to undertake, and it's clear for us. We'll keep sharing those information with different partners, and let's continue the conversation. Olivia, would you like to say anything before we conclude the call? My co-moderator.
No, that's everything, Cedric. Just a huge thank you to everybody who spoke and participated today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
This has been very great. We really appreciate your time and your contribution. Thank you.